The Detroit Red Wings have won 2 straight and now head west for a 5-game road trip. They're in the thick of the playoff hunt. Brian Fisher of Locked On Red Wings joins us to discuss their playoff prospects and what they may do at the trade deadline next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us and be part of the Locked On NHL family. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Red Wings, Brian Fisher. And Brian, a very interesting time for the Red Wings right now. A 2-game winning streak, kind of right in the thick of a playoff hunt, but now a 5-game West Coast road trip. What do you see as the key to continuing their success on this road trip?
Well, as has been the problem with this team all year long, it's going to come down to defense. And if they cannot prevent their opponents from taking high danger scoring chances, then they're not going to have success. Offensively speaking, they can score goals. We saw that against Vancouver on Sunday, or Saturday rather. And granted, Vancouver has the worst team save percentage in the entire league. But defensively, they tend to get caved in their own zone. And they let a lot, if you look at any heat map from this season, outside of the Calgary game on Thursday, it seems like every single game there's 5 or 6 shots at even strength taken right out in front of Ville Husso, who tends the net more times than not. So key to the success is if the defense can get together, and one, Jake Walman has to come back as he's day-to-day, but if this defense can get together and prevent opportunities from inside their own slot, they're going to have a good chance at winning games because they can hang with teams on when it comes to even strength goals. It's just they're defensively in their own zone. They tend to just, people talk about bend, not break. Well, they just tend to break more times than not.
Are you concerned about Husso being overworked at this point as we head down the stretch drive of the season?
Yeah, that's actually something Scotty and I talked about today on our recording is we expect Magnus Hellberg to get 1, if not 2 starts in this road trip. Obviously, at home, you want your better goalie at home to play more often than not. But he started the season incredibly well. He was on fire, had a save percentage of like .919, and then he had about a month where he struggled. And his save percentages come all the way back down to earth. It's floating around 900. I think it's a 903 right now. He's now strung together 2 back-to-back games where he's been really good. He had 1 goal against Calgary and just 2 against Vancouver. Both teams heavily outshot the Detroit Red Wings in those games. So he's been good. He just needs help. So there is a concern about maybe a little bit of burnout. And that's why we think that Magnus Hellberg, who, you never want a journeyman goaltender to be your backup, especially when you have a guy making $3 million sitting down in the Grand Rapids Griffins and Alex Nedeljkovic. But, you got to make do with what you got. And you can't ride a guy who's never played a full year as a starter the entire year. You're going to burn him out. So you have to give Hellberg spot starts. So I think if not the game against Vancouver, maybe at least one of the 2 back-to-back games, Edmonton, Calgary, Wednesday, Thursday, Hellberg will get one of those 2 starts without a doubt.
Talk to me about Lucas Raymond. I know he's listed as day-to-day right now, an important part of the Red Wings attack. What's happening with him and what is his future looking like short term?
Well, the game against Vancouver on Saturday, in which the Wings won 5-2, was the first game in his short career, 2-year career now, that he's ever missed. He had played all 82 games last season, like Seider did, and like Seider this year, he played every single game, which is incredible for a guy their age. But he collided with Ben Chiarot in practice. We don't know how the collision happened or what happened. We know it was accidental, but he left the ice in pain. And the only thing that the Red Wings have told us, because the Red Wings never show their hand, it's Yzerman never wants to tell the media anything. And I understand it and I respect it, but it can be frustrating when you want to know what's up. All we know is it's a lower body injury and that he's listed as day-to-day. And I hope it's true. And I hope that it was day-to-day ending tonight. By the time people are listening to this, I want him to be back against Vancouver, because without him, you have Dominik Kubalik, who is literally a healthy scratch against Calgary, immediately hopped up to the top line. I mean, that's how quickly that depth gets shaken. You need to have Dominik Kubalik go from, and let's be honest, he's a great power play asset. He's got a great shot, but that's all he is. He's a bottom six winger at best. And he immediately hops up. You need Lucas Raymond to be healthy because he's such a potent playmaker on this team, and he can score goals too. He's so good. He's on pace to break his rookie career high, which was like, I think in the 40s last season, if I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, maybe 57 points, something like that. And he was looking to do even more than that this year. So you need Lucas Raymond in the lineup.
No question about that. So the trade deadline is about 3 weeks away right now. Detroit fighting for one of those wild card spots, battling for playoff position. How do you think Steve Yzerman approaches the trade deadline, and what are the Wings looking to do?
I do think that inevitably the Wings are going to end up being a seller at the trade deadline, because while they're less than 10 points out of a playoff spot, if you look at the teams they're battling with, the Red Wings just aren't there yet. They just aren't. And I said it earlier in this segment, is that defensively, they just cannot. They're still a team trying to figure it out. You got a first-year head coach. You got a lot of young guys. Yeah, you signed a lot of veterans to deals this offseason, but if you look at what those deals were, Kopp and Schrock obviously were 5 and 4 year deals, but everyone else, Oli Mata was a 1-year deal. Perron and Kubalik were 2-year deals. They're not meant to be the team going forward. This is meant to be the team taking a step forward. But a step forward in the Atlantic Division and in the Eastern Conference doesn't mean a playoff spot. A step forward is going to probably be finishing 6th again, but going from 71 points to 84 points, which is a progression, but not a playoff team. So I think inevitably those guys you signed a shorter-term contracts, your David Perrons, your Oli Matas, maybe even your Dominik Kubalik, who was a guy that Yzerman took a flyer on. You could see those guys moved. And I think Tyler Bertuzzi is definitively going to get moved at this deadline. And I don't know if Red Wings fans are going to be happy with their return, because last year he obviously had a career year. He had 30 goals, 60-some points. He was great. But outside of last year, he's been injured. He's been hurt a lot, and this year's no exception. He broke both of his hands blocking shots, and then as soon as he came back from both of those injuries, he got hurt again. The second broken hand, he came back, he pulled a groin, I believe it was, immediately after that. And he's been returning to form lately. He's one of 2 players on the team that's got a above 50% Corsi for percentage. There's only 3 players on the team that have an above 50% Corsi for, and one of them is in Grand Rapids right now, Jacob Vrana. The other one is Jake Wallman. So Tyler Bertuzzi, losing him would stink, but Jeff Merrick came out and said that there were short extension talks, but went nowhere. He's going to get dealt, and that's going to sting. And I don't know if you're going to get the return you want because he's been so injury prone, but this team's not going to make the playoffs. It's just blunt. They're competing with teams that are in much better spots than they are. It's just not the year yet. It just isn't, but they have a lot of future ahead of them yet. So I preach patience still when it comes to the Red Wings. I know it's been since 2016, but the pieces are there. They're just not there yet.
And what are they looking for in return for some of these short-term veterans that they're looking to deal?
I mean, if you look at, if I'm talking personally, I would like the Red Wings to start shifting away from draft picks and more towards prospects, because, Larkin's turning 27 in June, June. And so you're hoping he signs an extension and stays long-term before the deadline comes. And I think he will. I do believe he will. But this team is looking to take that step forward, and prospects take a long time to develop. And if you're drafting them, they take even longer. If you can trade a Tyler Bertuzzi for a prospect that is already in a system that's already developing, it's a shorter timeline to get him to the Red Wings and getting them to be an effective player. Now, if you're talking draft picks wise, if they do take draft picks, David Perron maybe net you a second, Mata 3rd or a 4th. Tyler Bertuzzi, I would hope he can net you at least a 1st or a high-end prospect. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if you get less for him just because of the type of season he's had. So, I mean, I just hope for prospects more than picks at this point, but no one ever knows what's going on in Yzerman's head. He never shows his hand.
Yeah, part of the business, and I certainly know that from following Lou Lamoriello on the Islanders the last few years. So absolutely. Brian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast, where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast on YouTube, Megaphone's what sends out the podcast on Spotify and Apple, that is. The Odyssey app, obviously. Locked On Red Wings on all those things. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Red Wings. You can find me on Twitter at Brian Fisher, WWJ. It's the radio station I work for. And Scotty, which is my co-host, at Bentley Scotty. So we're on Twitter. We post daily. Sometimes it's hockey. Sometimes we're just posting for the sake of posting for fun. But yeah, listen to us. We try to have fun.
All right, Brian, always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point to the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn, one word, to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.